Thank you. Thank you. What amazing insights we have there. Big challenge from Reverend Thegu Mutahi, the moderator of the Presbyterian Church of East Africa. Big challenge, especially the need for us as a church, not just to call out on others, but the need to introspect ourselves. And even when we get into the political space, we are not just supposed to be there, but we're supposed to stand out with the biblical standards. Amazing and very insightful time. And we continue with a session here where we have a wonderful panelist. And wonderful panelists here who I'm sure have great CVs. Their CVs are on the public domain. And so I'll ask them rather to just give a 30-second self-introduction. That's like a high talk. It's a big thing, but just try starting from our brother Charles Kanjama. 30-second self-introduction.
Thank you, Edward. When people ask me what I do, I tell them my job is to heal relationships. And if you have not guessed, Amos chapter 5, verse 24 is the biblical quotation that inspires my work. Let justice flow like a river and righteousness like a never-ending stream. I'm an advocate of the High Court. My job is to seek justice for my clients. I'm also currently the chair of Kenya Christian Professionals Forum, and I'm delighted to be here.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much. We are glad to have you. Let's go to the next panelist.
Thank you, Mr. Reverend Buri. Reverend Father Joseph Mutie, a priest from the Coptic Orthodox Church, also the General Secretary of the Organization of African Instituted Churches, and also the Chair of the Intelligence Council of Kenya. Thank you.
All right, we're glad to have you. Thank you. Of course, there is another gentleman here who I'll ask also introduce yourself.
Thank you, Reverend. I am Dr. Ezekiel Mutua. I'm the CEO of the Kenya Film Classification Board, the board that regulates film and broadcast content in the country. Popularly now, the media refers to me in Kenya as the moral cop, a title that I've embraced and taken as a badge of honor because I think we need many more moral cops in this country.
All right, thank you so much. We are happy to have the moral cop with us. Moderator Thegu Mutahi, you don't need to introduce yourself. We already know you. And just to tell us that we are going to have a two-part session here, 30 minutes, the first 30 minutes with the panelists, and then we'll open it up to the gathered audience and also the virtual audience to make their contributions. And I think it's just right for us to start with the moral cop, right? And happy that you have taken up that as a badge of honor. But saying that is that you are hated and you're loved at the same time. And several times you have expressly told, especially artists, you have crossed the line. Now, what informs you or what facts make you determine that a moral line has been crossed?
Thank you. First of all, let me give a background of myself. I'm a journalist by training. I practiced journalism for 9 years with the Nation Media Group. I always tell Bishop Oginde, I was a journalist when journalism was journalism. And he knows those days. Then I became Secretary General of the Kenya Union of Journalists, and later on became Director of Information and Public Communications of this country. And then I was promoted to the Apex, which was Secretary of Information. And my master's was in Communication Studies. And at the time I was moving to Kenya Film Classification Board in 2015, I was a PhD candidate in Moi University. And my dissertation was in the same field of media and entertainment. I happened to be at the Ministry of ICT at a very crucial time between 2007 and they're leading to the post-election violence of 2008, 2007, 2008. And then I also, with CS Matiang'i, and I remember Bishop Ogide many times coming to our office, we pushed digital migration. And by the time I was moving to the Ministry of, to Kenya Film Classification Board in 2015, we had just completed the digital migration. So I moved to KFCB with an agenda because I knew the dangers that were going to come with an expanded digital spectrum, with the kids having iPhones. And these are decisions that were made out of studies about mobile telephone penetration and how it was going to impact the country. And with the iPhones and handheld devices in the hands of children, internet available in public places, in homes, I knew the dangers. So I moved to the board, took a pay cut, by the way, from Secretary of Information, permanent and pensionable, to take a contract of 3 years at KFCB on a pay cut for a mission to ensure that I become the moral conscience and I raise a national conversation about the dangers of the inappropriate media content, and that I protect children from exposure to harmful content.
Okay, very passionate.
So to answer how we determine, it's a very scientific process. I have a lot of very qualified staff with capacities to rate and classify films, to assign age appropriateness, and to determine whether this is for this age or that age. But more importantly, to be able to guide the country in public sensitization so that we have many other stakeholders like parents, like churches, and others speaking the same language, because you cannot legislate morality, but you can activate systems and networks that can speak about it and ensure that the country becomes morally conscious.
All right. Very passionate response there, and also very courageous to see with all the hate, you're still smiling, right? And you've mentioned about morality, it's not, you can legislate morality, and I think that's the point where we come to the lawyer here. And it's interesting that you quoted Amos chapter 5, verse 24, as your base of life, as you heal relationships. And Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in his famous speech, They Have a Dream, one of the things he said is that we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream, right? But when we look at our country, one of the things that is very disturbing is justice, its absence especially. But as we know that justice is really a cardinal virtue, and the question is, because the church has been often critiqued as not standing up in terms of many injustices that are done to people in the villages, sometimes also to presidential candidates, how can the church become a fierce advocate of justice at such a time as this?
I think the first idea I would like to propose is that we need to break down what we mean by church, what we mean by society, because this conference is on church and politics. And then it will be easier for us to see how the church can engage. And I've reflected on this for a long time. 11 years ago, when we were in the process of working towards a new constitution, several Christian professionals came together. Our job was to engage in training of trainers, to be resource persons for church, to engage in voter and civic education. And the question that was before Kenyans was, were we going to adopt a new constitution? And remember at that time, the church leaders spoke almost as one. They said, let's first correct the few remaining moral concerns we have with this document. Then after that, we can implement the constitution. And the politicians said, no, let's first adopt the constitution. And from that time, I've been reflecting. Is it that the people did not listen to the church leaders? Are we more political than we are religious? So what exactly is our understanding of church? What is our understanding of politics? And I would propose a threefold analysis of any society, including the church, including politics. And the first is the individual. Every society, first of all, is composed of individuals, the human person. And for church, our model of the human person is Jesus Christ himself. And we minister to the society out there. And so what is the role of the church in embracing politicians, in ministering to them when they are fallen, and in proposing to them that model that is Christ? And justice is done by individuals. You can't have justice as a theoretical concept if the people that are meant to implement justice are unjust. Justice is a virtue. Secondly, we have to look at the society from the perspective of ideas. The church itself has its key idea, which is the gospel, the biblical values. Society has its own ideas, and the role of the church is to propose its moral values, because ideas is what bring people together, is what gives them a goal to strive for. Are the political parties, for example, in a political space, striving for common good, as we had one of the previous speakers talk about? So the idea of justice is linked to the idea of goals, the common good, equitable sharing. And finally, when thinking about society, we have to think about the institutions, because people come together, they associate, first of all at the plenary level, and then you have subordinate institutions. What can the church say or do in terms of evaluating the institutions, the political parties, the governance institutions that have been set up to allocate, assign power, distribute resources, and engage in power relations? And fundamentally, my thinking is that to secure justice for the state as well as for the church, we have to focus on the individual, on the ideas and assessing the ideas of the political groups, and on the institutions that have been set up and proposing to them the model institution. How can you model yourself so that you are actually pursuing the various goods of justice?
Okay, very comprehensive response there. Father Joseph Mutie, during this pandemic season, one of the things that is very visible in the religious sector, let me call it that, is the prominence of the interreligious council, bridging the faith sector with the government. And from observation, that has been with fairly good success. And it has been a season whereby we have had more of the interreligious language more than the interdenominational language. And coming to the moral aspect, the question is on the moral front, right? What areas can this cooperation, interreligious cooperation, be able to get involved in so that we can improve the moral landscape of this country?
Thank you, Reverend Buri, and allow me to take this moment also to appreciate the religious leaders in this country for the boldness with which they come up always to act for common action when issues arise. The pandemic has not been an easy trail, and it has not been easy when we saw religious leaders stand and say, yes, we accept that religious places of worship can be closed. The elders should stay at home. Our young children should stay at home. We saw the schools closing. There were so many things that happened. But this made us more united as religious leaders, and I pray that we continue to be united. Coming to your question, what other area or what else could we also advocate for? As religious leaders, we are the moral compass, and that has been repeatedly said here. Mine is that there are so many areas that we could converge and talk together in one voice, in unison. The area of education is very key when it comes to shaping the generations to come. I would wish that we together spoke even to the curriculum. Sometimes times do not allow us to stay much with our children. But we have our religious spaces which also provide education, but also like education centers. And if you know the history of education, education started in a church. So why don't we go back and revisit our way of thinking and engage even in the area of education, so that we shape our generations, we shape our future leaders, we shape our society as we engage them as they grow. This is a very key area if we could also come together and find time, create time to engage as a religious fraternity.
Okay.
And this among other many areas.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty hopeful to find that there are other areas that the faith sector can cooperate when it comes to the moral landscape of this country. I know that we've heard a lot from Moderator, our Reverend Thegu, but when you talk about the standards, the biblical standards, we also have a constitution, right? And very clear in that constitution are what we call national values, right? But they seem lonely. But they don't seem to have real champions, right? And maybe just from your reflections, how can maybe the church adopt this lonely section of our constitution and be a champion in it?
Indeed, it's true, because you realize that even during the earthly ministry of Jesus Christ, he was not opposed to anything outside his area. There was a time that disciples came and told him, as we were walking aloud, we found some guy casting out demons. But because he does not belong to our fraternity, we verified him. And he told them, no, he may not be in our setup, but he is for us. So as a church, we should not just say what is with us is what we shall use in setting standards. Yes, we have much in scripture and in our traditions to align the country morally. But at the same time, there are such important documents like the Constitution. And fortunately, we were part of its formulation. And therefore, it is a low-hanging fruit for us to also use to align the morality and the ethics of this country. If you go to the Bill of Rights, it aligns very well with our teachings in the Bible. If you go to chapter 6, it also aligns very well and aligns very well with our teachings. So the church, and I believe many churches have departments or groups that deal with matters justice. They should arm themselves with the Bible, arm themselves with these documents, and many more that will assist them. And for sure, the Constitution in those areas that we have mentioned, in the Bill of Rights and in chapter 6, is very, very rich in making our position true. Because even where we are not speaking to those of our own, we are not speaking to our own faithfuls, we can take them to the Constitution. We can tell them, read chapter 6. What does it say? Knowing that chapter 6 is synonymous with what is in the Bible. Knowing that the Bill of Rights is synonymous with what is in the Bible. Therefore, I find it important to also use these documents and learn and read them, understand them, so that we can also break them down to our members and also talk about them in the nation. And that will create even a lot of cohesion in the country, because many people who are not of our faith will realize that we are not saying something that is outside our faith. So I believe the church, having been part of the formulation of the Constitution, should actively take up the Constitution and apply it when it comes to checking and stating standards. Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. Legitimacy right there in the Constitution when it comes to propagating the biblical standards as well. Let's go personal. Let's go personal here, Dr. Ezekiel Mutua. Now, when you tweet, because you're a tweep, right? You evangelize and prosecute in the same paragraph, right? And so people are mixed up. Are we talking to a public officer here? Are we talking to a pastor here? It's kind of confusing sometimes, right? Now, many people, many leaders, many persons in authority have a challenge, trying to mix the two, right? They sometimes want to just go one way, the professional way, and are pretty silent on their Christian side. Now, how do you do this? And what do you advise people in authority in terms of declaring their moral stand?
Thank you. First of all, I'm a product of the church. Without my faith, I think I'm nothing. The greatest miracle that happened in my life was on the 23rd of June, 1984, one afternoon when I was in Form 1, when I gave my life to the Lord Jesus Christ. And from there, I was a CU leader, CU chairman, and school captain, and my leadership style from that moment. And by the way, every school I went from then, I was the CU chairman and the school captain.
You're still behaving like a CU chairman even now, okay. Right? Yes.
A boy from an obscure village in Mwala, Machakos County, a place that is not in Google Maps. I topped in my primary school called Ikumini in 1984. Brilliantly, I did so well. I was to go to Machakos High School, but ended up in a place that closed called Popular High School. Just to receive Jesus. I think God denied me the chance to that famous school to go to Popular High School, which closed, by the way. And those schools are not on Google Maps, by the way. We are the kind that went to polling stations, Bishop Oginde. That people went to presidential debate venues. Now, I'm the kind that went to those kind of community projects. But because of 23rd of June, the decision I made that afternoon, 1984, I promised the Lord, if you make me go to Form 6, I will worship you and I'll preach about you. But I'll still do well in school. Remember, I topped in my primary school. I topped everywhere I went. I was number 1, by the way.
You also topped in
I'm not used to being number 2. So I was like, if this faith has brought me this far without a Godfather, if this faith has kept me and now I'm a CEO of Kenya Film Classification Board, why would I hide it? How can I? And I decided, because this is what happened. When I was Secretary General of KUJ and Bishop knows how much I was fought, I picked a gentleman I've seen here taking photos and picked that organization whose offices had been closed, and the Salaton Jau, who I have seen taking photos here, and the two of us with my PA revamped that organization to the point when I was leaving, actually the fight was about money. Bishop knows. So I was like, this God who has fought my battles, lifted me from the obscure village to the limelight. That is the God I will worship. And I promised him, if I become the president, I know Bishop has been, I will be a preaching president. I said if I become a CEO, I'll be a preaching CEO. If I become a minister, you can count on me. There will be a minister who preaches the gospel in Ezekiel Mutua. And first of all, there's nothing to be ashamed about. Reverend, the challenge of this country is not lack of policy, is not lack of laws, is not lack of legislative framework, is not lack of money. Our problem is the breakdown of our moral fabric. We've done very well in building the infrastructure, building hospitals and schools and highways, but we have neglected the software of our country. And I come as a prophet, true to my name.
Okay.
To speak about that neglect and say that's where the problem lies.
All right.
And so, while I do not lead the board by my preaching, as a matter of fact, we have won some of the most serious cases. Look at it against Kenya breweries, Safaricom, big conglomerates, big corporations with big money. We went to court and I told my board, there will be no beer aired in Kenya during the watershed period as long as I'm the CEO. I was told you don't talk like that. We went to court, and let me tell you what happened. I'll be very frank with you so that you take courage if you are here and God puts you in a position of authority. Even the Attorney General withdrew from that case, and I told the board I'll prosecute it. We won on every score, every point against Kenyan breweries. And from 2018, there is no beer advert during the watershed on our television stations. When 36 foreign organizations funded an LGBT film, an homosexual film, I banned it. I was bullied, I was called on names. We went to court, and you have seen the rulings. So we prosecute in line with the law first and the Constitution, but we also speak about our faith because it's what holds us together. And let me tell you, all other ground is sinking sand. This is the only truth that I know.
All right. And you speak like you're pitching for something. But that's okay. That's all right. This is okay. That's okay. Dr. Mutua has just talked about being in coming from an obscure place, where there are no, Google Maps and all that. And I think that also points us to maybe talk about our the moral connection between the Christian standards and the traditional African standards. Because there are many areas whereby we find so many debates, Father Mutie, about, let's take this Christian standard, let's abandon this traditional standard. Now, can you maybe just briefly guide us on maybe the correlation between the Christian moral standards and the traditional African standards?
Thank you, Reverend Buri. Sometimes there's a conflict between who are we, who am I? Am I an African or am I a Christian? Maybe that's a debate for another day. But it's important to realize here, why are we proud of our Africanness? The original way of thinking, or our forefathers' way of thinking, was that a community should be fair. A community should be just. There should not be suppression. Everybody belongs to the other, just like FSBT said in his book, I am because we are. And these were the guiding principles in the African context. And sometimes we read these in books, and we get to find people who live with these principles, even up to now. But where is the connectivity? When we become Christians, it's not that we are not Africans, but we get to understand our formation in Christ. And it is that which is in us that should be seen in publicity. In the public sphere. If I am a truthful person, if I am an honest person, it will tell that this is truly a Christian. Because look at Christ when he was on the cross. Despite the fact that he was under pain, even the soldier could say, truly, this was the man of God. I think that's where we need to come and draw the lines. People look at us and fail to understand who we are. We need to propagate the gospel through our character. Just as our Africanness is in us, let Christ, the Bible tells us, let your light so shine before men, and they will glorify your Father who is in heaven.
All right. A good link there. And just before we go to the questions for the gathered audience here and also the virtual, 1 minute, Brother Kanjama, you lead the Kenya Professional Christian Fellowship. And that means young professionals everywhere have something to inherit or to learn or to be inspired by from that organization. Now, I want just you to speak to the young professionals, because the young professionals frontier is such important. The workplace is such an important frontier of moral shaping and what they can do in their workplace so that the moral landscape of this country can be better improved.
Okay, that's a difficult question, but I would like to follow this 3 I's framework of the individual, the ideas, and the institution. And I think the suggestion I have applies not just to young professionals, but to all professionals and to all Christians everywhere. We are called at the individual level to become other Christs. And so there is that personal struggle to grow in virtue and to witness to the people around us. And I think you cannot be an effective apostle if you are not effective in your identification with the vine. You know, the branches have to be identified with the vine. And so for Kenya Christian Professionals Forum, the first aspect of becoming an effective professional is witnessing. Witnessing means you first look within and you ask yourself, where do I need to be another Christ? What would Jesus do if he was in my shoes? The second aspect is the aspect of ideas. Do we have the right values? Do we have the right goals? As a professional, we are straddling two worlds. The world of our Christian calling, our faith, our pursuit of holiness, and looking for eternity in the next world, and also in this world, trying to create a Christian society, and the professional world. I remember a young friend of mine telling me that when he went for an interview, or his first day at work, he was a good Christian. His CV showed among interests that he had been in the CU. In fact, he was like Dr. Mutua. He had been the chair of the CU. And his boss, who had accepted him the job, was a Christian. He was a Christian lawyer, at least Christian by name. And he told the fellow, I can see you are Christian. In fact, even me, I'm a Christian. But please remember that the way we do things here is the legal way. It's not the Christian way, it's the legal way. So there was a kind of like a contrast being put between the Christian way and the legal way. And that was unfortunate. But I think ultimately what we must say is that we must find how to get the values of our profession harmonized with the values of our Christianity. That's why I said, for me as a lawyer, Amos 5:24, for every profession, there must be values that are harmonized with our Christianity. Finally, the institution. If I'm an effective professional, I must leave the environment I find myself in better than I found it. I must Christianize that environment. It can't make me worse. And this was the idea of salt, converting the environment. If I'm in an environment where corruption is the order of the day to get court orders, do I leave that environment better than I found it, or do I get sucked into that environment? So, in conclusion, my advice to young professionals and to other professionals, your individual status, the ideas that you hold, and your ability to impact the institutions around you. That is a triple framework of a good Christian professional.
All right. Thank you so much, Brother Kanjama. And let's appreciate the panelists also here for such a great work so far. And let's now hear what the gathered audience here, the virtual audience are saying. And again, the panelists will respond ably.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Reverend Buri. I happen to be sharing a certain platform with Buri. As I told you earlier, I'm passionate about inspiring people to personal, professional, and patriotic excellency through Heshimika Excellency Initiative, because Kenya is Stahili Heshima. And Pastor Buri is one of the graduates of the program. So I salute you, Your Excellency. Now, we have a very robust audience online that is engaging fast and furious. The questions are flowing in, and we are going to just select a few of them that are representative of majority of them and share them to the panel to be able to respond to them. We have a question from Dr. Mike Gatogo from Moranga. He gives a comment. He says, this question of taking sides in politics on the part of the church, that is clergy, need to be looked more critically. Then question is, how can we promote good governance when it is not proper to examine the people who have offered themselves for leadership in crucial positions and communicate the same to electorate? How can we promote good governance when it's not proper to examine the people who have offered themselves for leadership in crucial positions and communicate the same to the electorate? The second question that's of interest to us is probably tied close to that. Says, this is Samuel, this one has not identified himself, Anon. Says, how can a believer navigate the current political terrain knowing that most of our parties are not Christian, in quotes? Should believers form one party? A final question, and I think this will be appropriate to one of our panelists here. Reverend Furi will determine who. Purity Wanja asks, tribalism is our worst enemy in Kenyan politics. Does the church have a solution to this? I seek your indulgence in these three questions from our online audience. As I ask the plenary here to prepare, I'll give you a chance to be able to also indulge. Reverend Furi, over to you.
All right, we appreciate our virtual audience for those very important questions. And Moderator, Reverend Thegu Mutahi, let's start with the question of tribalism. It's a very passionate matter. It keeps coming over and over again. And the question is expressed, does the church have a solution to this?
I would say yes, that the church has a solution, because in the ministry of Jesus Christ, he all along taught that there should be no discrimination on matters age, on matters status, social status. You know, we do not have Jews and Gentiles. The kingdom of God is open to those of this, or even of the young age. You know, let the children come to me. He had a place for women in his ministry. And he related with the Samaritans, because the greatest tribalism of his time was discrimination of the Samaritans. And you remember how he handled the issues touching on Samaritans. And even he gave a parable of Samaritans, calling them good. And a Samaritan would never be good, according to the standards of the time. So the church, the Christians, have something to look at from the ministry of Jesus Christ. When we practice or allow or even abet tribalism, we are not following the footsteps of our master, because our master would not have discriminated anyone. Remember, even the short man who went on top of a tree, Jesus had time for him. The children who were brought to him, and I'm sure they didn't look very good, Jesus had a place for them. And when he rose from the dead, we remember that he shared the breaking news of his resurrection to women, not to men. Therefore, that is our standard. So as we speak, as I said, we are sanitizing from within. We had not tribalism as an anathema within the church. Beyond that, we have to say that it shouldn't, guide all the decisions that we make as a nation. We should always stand firm. And as I said, being a Christian is not an easy thing. We should not assume because you are a Christian that things will not happen, that you will not be required to struggle. No, we'll have to struggle with these issues, but we must be victorious. Remember what God told Cain. He told him, yes, sin is crouching at you, but you must defeat it. Sin is always crouching at us. The sin of tribalism is crouching at all of us. It is appearing, to surround yourself with people of your tribe, the people of your community. That is sin crouching at you, but you must defeat it. So there is a lot of biblical basis to help us in dealing with these matters.
All right. The Bible has a solution. The church has a solution. The gap is in practice, right? This other question about sifting, the people who are in crucial positions and then informing the church. I mean, doing an analysis, doing an evaluation, and then informing the congregations that this is a person who subscribes to our standards, this one does not. Can you respond to that as a role of the church?
Absolutely. But I think it first begins with a personal encounter with the Lord, in my view, that for you to impact society and to be able to set the standards, you got to live them. You got to preach water and drink water. The contradictions that come, and this is where I was saying we have a challenge. We have a moral crisis and a failure of leadership at very many levels because we don't lead by example. What Reverend is saying here is the challenge of living your faith, even in the marketplace, and confronting evil because you can give the testimony that he said about the king who is saying, judge me. And it's not easy, especially now with social media and with everything exposed out there. You just got to first have a personal conviction about the call and about what is right for society. So that as we uphold the values of justice and fairness, then you can exercise, you can test them against the hard values of what you believe in. As a CEO, I have the power to hire and fire. And I have something called authority to incur expenditure. With my pen, taxpayers' money are put to use. And they can be misused. That authority is a very special thing. It is given to a privileged few to spend your taxes. And when I got that letter asking me to sign, I knelt down in my office and prayed that God help me, that during my tenure here, that my pen will not be expended to sign things that will not glorify your cause and add value to the Kenyan citizen. I think 6 years down the line, I can say like that king, judge me if I've taken bribe from you, and I'm sure we are on TV. Anybody, any supplier, any merchant who could say they came to KFCB, gave a bribe, or somebody wanted a job at KFCB and they needed to see the CEO separately to get the job. Mm-hmm. And I believe by those small deeds, I have built an organization where my colleagues look like preachers like me. We are different religions. And I can tell you, even the Muslims in our board, they are so upright and committed to what is good because I believe, and I say with humility, that they know that they can also hold their CEO to account. Oh. It's a privilege. And I want to challenge the same to our leaders. It's not easy. Reverend, it could not be put better. The challenge tonight was a befitting climax to the end of this conference. And I think that's the way to go, to have a moment of self-introspection, because you can't lead others if you cannot lead yourself. And therefore, the greatest challenge that I have as a CEO and a leader is how can I become a better person? So what do? I went to school. I did my master's and PhD at night when I was holding a very busy office. But I needed that education to inform policy making and decisions so that when I challenge authority or I present a proposal, it is sound. It's not just faith and preaching. And I think that's why we are where we are.
Okay. Clearly, we get that uprightness is actually possible, even in the public space. And we get that very strongly from Dr. Ezekiel Mutua here. Before we go to the other set of questions, this is a recurring question, Father Mutie, about the possibility of having a Christian political party. I know this is huge, but seeing the positiveness that we are seeing in terms of the way the faith-based organization, the faith sector is working together, and what's the possibility of having a Christian party?
Thank you for that, Reverend. I think that's very overwhelming. I never thought that we would have such a thought. But my take is that just as our presenters, just our able leaders spoke to us throughout this couple of days, ours is to engage. In fact, ours is to strategically place ourselves and play our role as religious leaders, to aid, to support, to work with. Because why? We are not running away from the politics or the politicians. But remember, these politicians are our congregants. They are our children. And we would want to nurture them, see them grow. I pray that we get to a position where we could even recall them if they misbehave. They are members of our churches. Just to tell them that, brother, sister, this is not the right way to govern us. This is the time, this is the moment where we are reflecting together as a family of faith. How do we go about the business of the day when it comes to politics? Not that we are going to swim into that dam, but understand and get the politicians also to understand that we know politics. And we know what is good for our people, but also what is bad for our people. Ours is to propagate the good that they do. They do the right thing, the good thing, and that which is fitting in the situations that may occur. Thank you.
Edward, I would like to add...
Very briefly.
Yeah. KCPF, we've been thinking about some of the questions you've asked or that have been asked about tribalism and also about how to hold our political leaders to account as a church or the Christian community. And we have come up with a number of proposals and 3 very specific and brief. 1, if the church community can come together and develop a code of conduct. We know that IEBC have their code of conduct that every politician signs when they are a candidate for elections. If we can come up with a code of conduct that is voluntary, but that clearly articulates what are those values we expect of our Christians who are in the political space, so that they will know what it is we expect of them in terms of their conduct. Number 2, if we can find a way of getting information about candidates in terms of have they been compliant with these values. You put the information out there because many times the challenge in our politics is people don't have information about candidates until they're elected. Then you start seeing the way people are behaving and say, gosh, how did I vote for this person or this other person? I didn't know this. So I think the issue of track record is critical, and we can get information. I've seen this happen in other countries. Thirdly, and I've seen this happening elsewhere, when we look for our key values, we can have, not as the church leaders, but as organizations that are para-church, like KCPF, we can assess politicians. How pro-life are you? How tribal or how much integrity do you have based on the information we have? We put it out there. People make their decisions.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. And clearly you think in threes. Every point you've given, 3 things. 3 things. And I would want to say to also the Master of Ceremony here, please give us 3 more.
3 more.
Persons
All
from
right.
the floor.
So I will take 3 questions from the plenary because Kanjama is a man of 3. All right. We have, I'll adopt the approach of Vincent, my predecessor here in moderating. We'll take at the back there, a gentleman with a black jacket. And then we come to the front here, there's a wonderful lady here with a, I don't know what color that is. And then there's a gentleman here. Please, if you can come to the fore and ask your questions in brevity, just precise. No comments, just a question. And we'll appreciate so that we can allow for more questions that...
Good afternoon, everyone. All the protocol observed. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Okanda Eugene. I am part of the Esabika G-Pro cohort, and I'm an intern at the State Department for Youth Affairs. My question goes to the church speakers. I think in our country, we suffer in what I call political arrhythmia, whereby we do not experience a flow of authentic leaders from one generation to another. And I believe leadership is generational. And if we have a generation that does not have the capacity to lead in that time, then we'll experience poor leadership and governance. So my question is, like Paul and Timothy, do we have enough church leaders? What I call, do we have enough Pauls to hold Timothy to accountable, so that we are confident of the next generation of leaders, so that we are not experiencing what I call political governance and leadership arrhythmia, that we can be confident to say that we are going to elect someone and we're going to have that guy to lead us as the president of our republic, and even in other political spaces. And I think that's my question. Thank you.
My name is Pauline. I am a staff of Focus Kenya. Been told to give one question, though I had 4, so I'll give them as one very quickly. So we have been having this conversation about how the church should participate in the education sector. And now I'm wondering, the 663, the other curriculum that is beginning, I hear many testimonies of how people are seeing the value. But how can we salvage the cohort still in 844, or are they just going to add up to another cohort of people who experience the frustration of this system? And then unemployment and unemployed youths have been a very big majority in this country. And these people are also, in a way, idle. And now the question is, how can we as a church reach out to them, because they are the population that are more vulnerable to political brainwashing? Said I'll put them all as one question, so I'm continuing. So there are these over-empowered movements from all the contents that we watch, and they have been really lobbying for a lot of bills and policy amendments to accommodate perceptions that have been gathered all over. What is the response of the church to that? How can we be moral cops without being obsessive critics, if I were to call it, being excessively salty until the world cannot engage in what we are calling them out to? And finally, how do we deal with the reality of sin and the moral perforation of the moral fabric perforation, and the fact that even as a church we cannot call ourselves perfectionism? How do we hold up moral authority in that light? And finally, it is. Thank you.
All right. And our panelists just know that each of these will take a minute, because we have about 6 minutes to do that. So one more.
Good afternoon. My name is Bernice Gashego. I'm stepping in for the gentleman in a dark jacket. He gave his place to me. And But mine is really a comment because I felt I wouldn't let the question go. Can the Christians register a political party? Because I was registrar of political parties. And I want to say that, first as an initial, let me say, when you visualize registering a political party or a Christian political party, you need to see it in the context that, one, the party has to have a name. So are you going to call it Kenya Christian Party? Name is very critical for the registrar. Secondly, it has to have a logo or it has like a symbol. It has to have a symbol. So will you put a cross? Will you put, this is what you think when you go to the registrar. Thirdly, it has officials, a chair, a secretary. And I dare say in my time, I did register, what you might call. But it was very interesting because often before the registration, investigation will be done. But in the case of this party, it really was that the members were Christians. I knew them to be Christians. Now, the history of that party is what tends to happen in our country when we have nominations. So if you want to be in Jubilee or ODM and you don't get the nomination, many of those people go to that party and say, please, I want to run and I've not. And so this party tends to facilitate them. So when you think of a political party, it's about name, it's about symbol, it's about who will run on your party. And they'll not necessarily be Christian because we are a secular state. So I support that idea. Let Christians go into other parties. It really, you can imagine our country is secular. You have Northeastern, which is largely Muslim. Are you saying that you wouldn't nominate a candidate from there because your party is called the Kenya Christian Party? I hope I've answered. Thank you.
All right. A real education moment there. Let's appreciate that response. Let's appreciate this wonderful, enlightening response there. This is really quick, and I will try to phrase this first question in moral language. And Moderator Reverend Thegu Mutahi, is it moral to have what we can say only senior or age-heavy Christian leaders at the top?
Well, we would need to accept that over time as you serve, you gain experience, and that experience is very useful to every society, and it shouldn't be lost. And that does not mean that you should not nurture young people, and there are people who are talented in many ways who come up into leadership. But again, remember the Bible is also teaching against, giving leadership to people who are very young in faith. It is saying that people should have been in faith for some time for them to have been nurtured. And even when we talk of Timothy and Titus, there were people who had the tutelage of Apostle Paul for some time before he handed over the mantle. And he speaks about how they have been nurtured, particularly Timothy, from the days of his grandmother to his mother and to Apostle Paul himself and the elders. So I think it's good to remain a student longer than to take up leadership, because leadership has many demands, and at the same time it has many expectations and many temptations. So I wouldn't say that it's late at any point to take up leadership. So young people should live along with people who are old. They should work together. The old must not frustrate the young people. They should nurture them. Mentorship should go on. But I would also encourage the young people not to look at leadership as, the only destination that you want to get to. There's a lot of service within church, even without having a substantive position of leadership. And even those who are in leadership are dependent on those who make the wheel move. So you should feel useful, whatever responsibility you are holding in church. But that does not mean that leadership should not be availed. But remember that when a leadership is availed to you, you are putting yourself in to be questioned and to be checked and so on. So let not run into it, but strive to get experience and knowledge so that when eventually we get it, we'll be able to guide others.
All right, thank you so much for that response. Dr. Ezekiel, this is also your final comment by responding to this question. Is there anything like being excessively salty?
Absolutely. Everything requires a balance and a strategy. But ultimately, the different styles or different times require different tactics. And therefore, it is up to the leader to read the environment and decide which strategy to employ. Ultimately, if you speak to the needs of the people, like when I joined KFCB in 2015, people called me the moral cop, the first thing our reaction was that is not a good thing. In fact, it did not help matters that the chairman of the board is a bishop. So we went actually to commission a survey and find out whether our message is selling. We announced it publicly. It was covered in the media in 2016, and 80% of Kenyans, including parents, religious leaders, and other leaders, were in support of the conversations about regulation of the media. So if you speak to the needs of the people and you are helping parents to ensure that their kids are safe, the staff of KFCB, the budget was 88 million, we have grown it to 600, our portfolio is about 2.4 billion. People want their needs resolved. When COVID came and KQ sent a letter that they are retrenching, I sent mine and assured my staff, none of you will lose their job because of COVID. Not because I'm a miracle worker, none has lost. We have more money now than we had before COVID. And therefore, it's a strategy of what works, being relevant, but also speaking to the needs of the people.
All right, thank you so much. And for all our viewers who have been part of this discussion, thank you very much for all your questions, and for all of us who are gathered here, thank you for being a very active presence here. And for the panelists, let's put our hands together again for them for such wonderful responses. Again, thank you so much. Definitely a lot of good going forward. Over back to the Master of Ceremony.